This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Katie Hammock. Katie is a registered ER nurse, proud dairy farmer's wife, and a mom of 3 raising her family in rural Virginia. With roots that stretch from Canada to the heart of dairy country, Katie brings a rare and powerful perspective to the table. By day, Katie works the fast-paced floors of the emergency room. And by night, and really, to be honest, all of the hours in between, she's fully immersed in farm life, milking cows, managing farm family life, and witnessing firsthand the risks that come with a life in agriculture. A quick note before we begin, this episode includes discussions of farm accidents and medical emergencies. If these topics are sensitive for you, please listen with care. In our conversation, Katie opens up about the emotional weight of farm accidents, what she's seen in the ER, and why she's made it her mission to bring farm safety to the forefront. From tourniquets to whistles and communication plans, Katie offers practical, potentially life-saving advice every rural family should hear. If you've ever wondered what's really good in an emergency kit or why preparation matters more than we think, this one is for you. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Katie. Katie, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I am so excited to dive into your story and learn all the things about Katie. So before I fangirl too much, tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my name's Katie Hammock. I am initially from Canada, actually. I grew up outside of Ottawa, Ontario, on the eastern side of Canada, and found myself in Southern Virginia to go to school. Full intentions of going back home at some point after I graduated nursing school, and then ended up sticking around for a job and met my husband in that first kind of few months out of nursing school. And it's hard to take a farm to a different country, so I moved to the farm. So we've been married for almost 5 years now, and I've lived on my husband's dairy farm, and I still work as an ER nurse. So I'm an ER nurse with 6 years of experience serving rural Southern Virginia. I work in our trauma center, so essentially we get anything and everything that's critical comes to the hospital that I work at. And that's kind of where my passion started, just like I am really passionate about emergency medicine and really passionate about farm accidents. Unfortunately, they happen too often. And then kind of when I married my husband and got more involved in the agriculture community, I just saw that A, there was a need, and B, the people that I were coming in with those accidents were often people that I knew or my husband knew or somebody kind of knew of. And so it just kind of hit home a little bit more.
And I want to dive into the farm safety piece because it's such a huge topic and it's something that I don't think we talk about nearly enough. But I want to know, Katie, more and about your farm and all of the things. What made you decide to go to school in Virginia in the first place?
Yeah, so I actually came to school in Southern Virginia really to play soccer. So I played collegiate soccer, and the school I ended up going to was one of the very few schools that I talked to that would allow me to play soccer and go to nursing school, just because nursing school is such like a rigorous schedule as well as collegiate soccer. So that was kind of what got me down here initially. I had a dream of playing like NCAA soccer. That's kind of a thing that, in Canada, a lot of people look to and aspire to do. And so I was fortunate enough that I had a school in Virginia interested in me. And so that's kind of what initially got me here. And then, like I said, I had full intentions of moving back home, and those plans changed pretty quickly.
Met that charming farmer.
I know.
So going back to being born and raised in the Ottawa area, I recently went to Ottawa for my very first time a couple months ago now, and I absolutely fell in love with the area and the landscape. What was your views in agriculture and farming being raised in that area? It's a little bit different from where you are now.
Yes, and multiple different aspects. I was fortunate. I did have some family that farmed growing up. So I had some family actually farmed in northeastern Pennsylvania. They dairy farmed, and several other family members that like lived in the country and were involved in agriculture. So I grew up going to my aunts and uncles' dairy farm on like holidays and weekends. And that is truly like where my love for ag and for the dairy industry began. My friends always joked that like I would end up marrying a dairy farmer. I never in a million years thought that I would be the one that did marry a dairy farmer, but it was just kind of like a running joke growing up that like people always said I would live on a farm. But then, it's different when you're only going to visit a farm on weekends and holidays versus like then moving into the farm and just being fully submersed into this lifestyle. And so that was just a little bit of a learning curve of like, Ottawa, like it is a city. And even though we were in the outskirts of Ottawa, like we were surrounded by stores and there were so many different things that you could do. And so even just something as simple as like planning out my groceries because there wasn't a grocery store nearby. Whereas like at home, I grew up and there was like 7 grocery stores within like 5 minutes of me and stuff like that. So just like some of those little differences that I kind of had to figure out as I moved here. But other than that, it wasn't too bad.
Well, and I love that you had that exposure, I guess, to dairy farming before. I am very thankful that I met a grain farmer because, truth be told, I don't think I am like rough and tough enough or consistent enough in basically anything to be a dairy farmer.
Oh, you could totally do it. You could totally do it.
My thing would be is I would probably just want to play with the calves all day and I wouldn't get much else done. But tell us about your dairy farm and where your husband and you live and what you're raising and all of the things dairy.
Yeah. So my husband is a 4th generation dairy farm. It's him, his dad, and his dad's 2 brothers. And then they have some cousins that are back on the farm. So we are currently milking about 900 cows 3 times a day. We just got in a new parlor and are hoping to continue to expand that up to about 1,200 in the next, 6 months to a year. And then we farm about 1,000 acres of cropland. Most of that is corn that we use for corn silage to feed our cows. So that's kind of where we're at. We live on the farm. We are like a quarter of a mile down the road from like the milking parlor, and all of the family lives right here within us. So my husband, does most of the farm stuff. I try to be involved as much as I can. I was a lot more involved before we had a kid, and now we have a almost 2-year-old running around that keeps us busy. And it's nice because he is starting to get old enough that he's always been at the farm all the time, but we can really take him and we can kind of help a little bit here and there, and he can, listen and is starting to just be interested in that a little bit more. And so that's just like brings a whole nother kind of aspect, another dimension that is really fun just to like watch him learn to love the agriculture community the way that we do. And so that's just kind of been a fun thing as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We milk cows and farm some corn, and really that's really all we do.
I love it when you say, well, that's all we do. You milk 900 cows 3 times a day. Like,
yeah.
I struggle to empty the dishwasher sometimes. Like, bravo to you.
We are very fortunate. It's very much my husband and his, like the guys, but we are very fortunate. We have a really good crew of employees that, obviously help us in milk and that kind of stuff. So we are really good, really blessed with like a good crew right now for sure.
Yeah. And it takes a team, it takes a village, it takes all of these things to make any farming operation run. I'm curious, when you are helping, what are some of your favorite jobs to do?
So I love the calves, like you said, but that is not kind of what my husband focuses on. Like, so they kind of have it broken down into different areas. So my husband really focuses on heifers and above. So once the heifers go into the pasture and are kind of weaned off of their milk and stuff, that's really when my husband and his brother and dad take over managing the cows, and they essentially manage them. So they will breed the cows, they will help them calve if needed, and then they manage the milk cows, dry cows, anything like that. And then in the summer, it's all kind of hands on deck to chop corn and that kind of thing. But I feel like now mostly what I find myself doing is, this morning, my little boy and we went and helped kind of move dry cows around. And because we can be in the feed lane, I can kind of help like unlock cows as they needed from the head gates, or, mark cows with paint if needed, or help vaccinate cows, that kind of thing. My favorite job to do is feed the calves, but that's not something my husband does too much of. So that's kind of, if we're lucky and, whoever's feeding the calves, sometimes we'll go down and just play with them. But for the most part, it's really whatever my husband's doing. If he's breeding heifers, sometimes we'll go and just like be there and just like be outside. Or my husband also ultrasounds our own animals. So a lot of times we'll go and like run the list is what we call it. So we'll just like go and do preg check with them and just like run the list to see if they're pregnant, if they're not pregnant. And then in the summer, I feel like it's kind of, I'm a little bit of a like taxi depending on what's needed, and, trying to go get parts, or if something's broken down, or go get food for the guys or whatever. And we're really fortunate. We have we are really fortunate that we have a good crew, but then also all of our wives and my mother-in-law and stuff, like we have a really good and positive relationship. So it's kind of nice. We can kind of just tag team whatever's needed and just like that support them in whatever way they need that day.
That's awesome. And, we can say this a million times. It takes a team, and it takes people with different diverse skills, and something as easy as going to grab parts can really make or break an operation in a day, right? Bring back what you need to keep it going. So that's amazing. So you're an ER nurse, as well as all of those things that you just mentioned. Talk to me about initially when you moved onto the farm and obviously started working and being surrounded in this culture and this lifestyle of agriculture. Were there any warning bells that were going off for you as an ER nurse in the beginning that maybe you didn't think of?
There's definitely been a handful of times that I've like looked at my husband. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I have seen this, go wrong so many times, but I don't think there's anything like super, super massive. My husband for the most part is like pretty safe. And I think part of that is because I have like told him like the realities of like not being safe, and just like the realities of like, and the dangers of farming and just the agriculture industry in general. I mean, just last year, there was almost 500 deaths alone in the United States. So I'll be honest, I don't know what that looks like in Canada or North America wide, but in the US alone, there was 500 deaths related to farm accidents. And so I do think that like my husband takes it seriously, because he's seen me like come home crying because of like a really unfortunate situation that happened at work, or like a really bad accident or something like that. And so he's just seen like how it can change so quickly. But I think, when I did move to the farm, there was definitely a little bit of just like a change in my perspective as an ER nurse, and just like realizing that like accidents really do happen. I think before there was definitely sometimes that I was like, man, these guys are like, just being dangerous and not trying to be safe, and, or like doing something dumb, for lack of a better word. And then you move to the farm and you realize like, they really aren't, like they're just trying to do what they need to do and just kind of get their jobs done, and they're trying to do it to the best of their abilities. And then I think the other thing is it just allowed me to connect with some of those patients a little bit better, because I understand like where they're coming from, and I can like talk to them about the fact that like my husband's a farmer, and I've done this and I kind of know what they're talking about. And also just like sometimes farmers like don't come off as, I don't know, maybe sometimes they're not like the most gentle spoken, the most like passionately spoken people or emotional people. And so being able to just be there and be like, oh, this is like, he's not, just kind of translate that as needed and just kind of be able to be someone that can relate to them in that incident.
Right. And I think from my perspective, you have the best of both worlds. You have growing up not rurally and not in farming, and now being immersed in the farming lifestyle, and to see it from both sides as an ER nurse. And like you said, a typical ER nurse that might not be exposed to this might think like, wow, they must have been doing something really silly for this to happen. But in all reality, things can happen so quickly. I'm curious, do you remember the first farming accident that you had to deal with in your nursing career?
Well, if I remember my first one, to be honest. I have a couple that like I vividly remember that were like earlier on in my nursing career. One of them was somebody that broke their leg. I don't know like how like in depth you want me to go and explaining the injury, but essentially they broke their leg and there was bones sticking out both ways. So like completely broken, broke the skin, and he just jumped off of a tractor. Like he was done was just trying to get out of a tractor. He was done doing whatever he was going to do in it. And he jumped and his leg just like snapped. And so he actually like came in, just not even in the ambulance. He just like somebody drove him in and he came in, and I vividly remember that one. And then one of the other ones I vividly remember is this was actually in the trauma bay, and it was, I don't even remember exactly what like piece of equipment they were using, but it was like a hand amputation. So they had a tourniquet in place and his hand like was pretty mangled, pretty much amputated. And so he ended up in our trauma bay. But those are kind of the two that I like vividly remember from earlier on in my career.
Right. And like you said, just jumping off of a tractor wrong can be something that happens. You step your foot down wrong or whatever it is. What do you think are some of the most common farming accidents that you see come through the ER?
We see a lot of chainsaw accidents. That's like one that kind of comes to mind. Typically, those are like not very nice accidents because chainsaws like don't cut cleanly. So when they cut your skin, it really just like mangles everything and can really do a lot of damage. So I've seen like people lose a lot of blood due to chainsaw accidents. I've seen chainsaw accidents because they're trying to cut like down trees off of a fence or trying to cut up like brush piles or whatever. I've also seen, we kind of talked about lawnmowers briefly before this, but I have seen people run over themselves in bush hogs. I've seen people get run over by bush hogs. I've seen legs and feet amputated due to mowers and bush hogs. Hands stuck in like PTO shaft get mangled. We also have a lot of, this one is like not as serious, but it's still traumatic for somebody, but like finger amputations. So a lot of like table saw finger amputations or chopping wood finger amputations. And then some of the other things that we kind of see farm related are a little bit more medical, but we see a lot of like cardiac injuries or cardiac events, I should say. So like people that were working in the hayfield in 90-degree weather and it's really hot out and they maybe overdid it themselves and weren't like hydrated enough and they like went into cardiac arrest and had to like be revived, or electrocution. So we unfortunately actually had a electrocution here recently in our county that was a piece of equipment touched the power lines and electrocuted the farmer on the other side of that. They're kind of some of the ones that we see. And then even just simple, like you said, like jumping out of a tractor. I've seen a lot of elderly people that get in and out of tractors, like fall off of the tractor and break their hips or fall off and like dislocate their hip or that kind of thing. But I think those are like main ones that kind of come to mind.
Right. And like you said, some of them are extremely severe to the most common. And I will raise my hand and tell you, I have had 2 concussions from farming accidents that were so simple and basic. One, I was cleaning windows and I stepped my foot wrong and I fell off the tractor. The second was I was shoveling out the grain truck and it had the bars across the top and I stood up and knocked myself out. Like these are just simple tasks that we're doing. That obviously was an accident and I've done it a million times since then and it hasn't happened, but I'm so conscious now of where's my noggin.
Yeah. We see people all the time that like, again, like not somebody that did on purpose, but like walked into a bucket loader or walked into like, something, because it's, again, like you said, they've done it a million times. And I think that that's the like an important piece just to like realize is that like accidents are called accidents for a reason. It's because they truly are accidents. And so, yes, there's some farm injuries and farm accidents that happen because people weren't prepared and maybe didn't do like all of the things that they should have done. But I feel like 9 times out of 10, the accidents that I see are genuinely accidents and are accidents that like could have happened to anybody and were just like really unfortunate situations. And so, like those are the ones that like are almost more scary because you don't know what it's going to happen because you can't really prepare for it because it truly is just an accident.
Right. And do you find that maybe farmers, when those accidents do happen, may or may not seek help because of maybe embarrassment?
Yes, they definitely, I feel like, don't always seek help, or sometimes like just in general. Like I know a lot of people that are like, oh, I'll go to the doctor in like 3 days if it's not better. And I mean, we've had some people that come in that are like, oh, I fell off a tractor 3 days ago and like their lung is completely collapsed and they've been living with it for 3 days and they got finally to a point that they couldn't breathe. So they came in to see us. And I don't know if it's embarrassment or if it's just that farmers are like in general pretty stoic people and are pretty tough people, and that they really don't think that there's anything wrong until like they get to the point that they cannot function, and then they come in and see us. And like we always joke in the emergency room, but like it's true. Like if somebody comes in and tells us that they're a farmer and they're there, like oftentimes we take them seriously because like stereotypically those type of people and farmers don't come, like they don't want to come into the ER. They don't want to be seen by a doctor. And so I don't know what the reason is, but I do think that like farm accidents are probably underreported across like the world. And I do think that like not all the time do people like go and seek help when necessary.
I'm thinking there was a viral TikTok. I don't know how long ago it was, but it was, the skit of the ER nurse saying that there was a farmer here and it was like all hands on deck, like code whatever, because a farmer came in to the hospital. And like you said, there could be so many different reasons that people choose to seek help or not seek help. But I'm curious, you had mentioned about being prepared for accidents. So what are your tips and advice of what we can do as farmers and things that we can have on hand to be prepared for accidents if they do happen?
My like perspective on this is very emergency medicine focused. So it's very like ER nurse focused, not so much like the mechanics and like the equipment, machinery type of things. And there's a lot of stuff on that end that you can do to prepare and prevent accidents. But what my passion and what I try to focus on is preparing and preventing for like injuries that we can do something about. So there is some injuries that happen on the farm. For example, like if you amputate your leg or you amputate your arm or you get a really bad chainsaw accident, that we can do something about those prior to seeking help or prior to getting to a hospital or even prior to an ambulance coming to getting to us. So I know for us, like if there's ever a medical emergency where we are, we're going to be life flighted in a helicopter to a hospital because we're in the middle of nowhere. And B, it's going to take probably 20 minutes for an ambulance to get to us. And so the reality is that it takes less than 5 minutes for somebody to bleed out if they have a serious accident. So if I don't have what I need on hand to stop bleeding and control the bleeding, like that's detrimental to my husband or my father-in-law's or whoever's outcome that, was involved in that accident. And so I have 5 items that I kind of talk about in general, just trying to focus on preparing for those type of injuries. A lot of them are in preparation for like hemorrhage that's just a fancy word for like bleeding type injuries, because those are the ones that we can kind of control. And I say kind of because there's some type of bleedings that like happen internally that like we can't do anything about. But the external ones we can absolutely, be prepared for. And so first and foremost, the thing that's like arguably, in my opinion, the most important to have on your farm is a tourniquet. A tourniquet is essentially a piece of medical equipment that wraps around your limb and cuts off circulation. So it's for injuries to your arms, to your legs. Again, like if you got your hand stuck in a PTO shaft and you mangled your hand, I've seen this happen in real life, and you have like mangled your hand and there's blood rushing everywhere, a tourniquet on that arm is going to stop the circulation to that hand and therefore stop the bleeding until an ambulance or somebody can get there. What you do with the tourniquet is you place it 2 to 4 inches above the injury, and then you essentially are just going to tighten it really, really tight. In my opinion, there's I just feel like that's something that everybody should have. They're so inexpensive. You can buy them online. They're so compact. You can put one, as many as you want in a tractor cab or in a truck or whatever. And that's like the one thing single-handedly that I see save more lives than any other piece of like medical equipment that I see kind of in the field prior to getting to the hospital. One question just like that I feel like I get a lot about this is you cannot put a tourniquet like around your neck because obviously that would not end well. But I have had that asked, so I just like to kind of just throw that out there. So really tourniquets are just used for your arms and your legs. And that's kind of that. The next piece of like nice little thing I try to have around is called Quick Clot. Now I will say this is a little bit more expensive, but I genuinely think that this is worth its weight in gold if you ever had to use it. Quick Clot is essentially just a fancy type of gauze that helps your blood clot faster. So it has kaolin in it. Kaolin is already in our blood. It's a clotting factor that's found in our blood. And so this gauze essentially is going to clot off the blood that is coming from a wound or a laceration. These are really good where we use them a lot in the trauma bay, or where we see them on is like head injuries. So like that person that walked into like a bucket and like cut their head open. If you've ever cut your head open, you know that they will just like bleed and bleed and bleed and bleed. And Quick Clot's really good just to like put on that and maintain pressure because it just is going to help clot your blood off faster. Another place that I see this a lot and is groin. So like I don't say that this is like super common, but I've seen it like a decent amount of times. That it's worth mentioning is like accidental gunshot wounds to the groin. I know that that's not necessarily farm related, but like groin injuries or stuff like that. Again, you can't put a tourniquet there, but you can press and hold Quick Clot to help clot off that blood faster. The next thing I have is Coban, and Coban is essentially just like the medical version of vet wrap. So if you have vet wrap, it literally is the exact same thing. You can probably buy vet wrap cheaper than you can buy Coban, but basically, that is just it is a type of something that you can just wrap around that wound when you've put Quick Clot on, and it's going to maintain that pressure because ideally what you want to do is put Quick Clot on wherever you have that injury, wrap some Coban around it, and maintain that pressure on the injury until you get to the hospital where hopefully at that point, the bleeding is done. But if not, you're at least decreasing the blood flow out of that injury. The next thing I have to prepare is kind of a random one, but is something that I didn't even like initially kind of have in this kit or these items, but I have seen several times. So I decided to put it in as a whistle. And this is really just to be able to call for help in the event of emergency. So if you ever find yourself like having fallen off of a tractor and broken your hip and you don't have cell service, that you can at least whistle for help and hopefully somebody will hear you. And again, like it sounds kind of silly, but the only reason I have it in this kit is because I've had like 2 or 3 patients that have said that that's how they like got help to them. And so I think if it is, able to help one person, it's worth that. And then the last thing that I have in this like 5 items is a CPR shield. And again, kind of what we talked about, a lot of stuff I see is like accident and medical as accident and like injury related. But then a lot of stuff I see coming from farms and agriculture is medical or like medicine related. And so CPR shield essentially just allows you to perform rescue breaths on somebody. So if you ever got to a situation that somebody did not have a pulse and you had to perform CPR, a CPR shield is just a barrier that you place on their mouth that allows you to perform rescue breaths safely, not only, for us, but for the patient as well. And so that's kind of like the 5 like main first aid safety items that I really think people should have on their farm operations, whether you are an animal farmer, a grain farmer. There's equipment that's dangerous and there's things that can go wrong very quickly. And those are all items that I've seen save lives and seen help people in real life.
Absolutely. And before we go any further, you actually have this list available online for people. If they were driving and they didn't write all of those things down, tell the folks where they can find this information that you just gave them.
Yeah, so I have all of this information on my Instagram. I am the Dairy Wife is my username. And I also actually have a farm emergency kit as well that has all of these items and a few extra because we were talking to my husband about just kind of some of the other things that like we actually use on a regular basis, and like burn cream and band-aids and those type of things, and just a couple other items that I think are important to have in the event of an emergency situation. Trauma shears are great because they allow you to like gain access to an injury or cut off seatbelts or cut anything that's in the way. Emergency blankets are great because in hypothermia or somebody being cold is one of the leading things in trauma patients that can like have a really negative outcome. So kind of the farm emergency kit has all of those items plus a few other items that I feel like are beneficial to have in any operation.
Yeah. And we'll link all of that in the show notes and links and everything as well. I'm curious. So for us personally, we have multiple first aid kits available in our shops and in our trucks. Where do you suggest putting these kits?
I think that depends on how your farm is set up. So for us, we have one in our main office in the dairy barn is where we have one. And then obviously I have more like at my house if we ever needed more, but we have one in a central location because we farm, like our furthest field that we farm is like 2 miles away. And so I feel confident that if there was ever an event of an emergency, like somebody would be at the farm where we could go get it and come back to it. But I've talked to people that like they farm like 45 minutes away from their home farm. And so in the event of that, I think, either having one in like a vehicle that like is typically goes with you wherever you're farming for that day, or having one at like each farm location. Because again, like if you have to drive 30, 45 minutes to get this, A, an ambulance is going to be there, but B, like it kind of defeats the purpose of some of these like hemorrhage control items.
Yeah, for sure. And something that I have always been very cognizant of, and this actually happened because of an emergency that we did have, and it wasn't life-threatening, but it did require an emergency room visit. I grew up a literal like minute and a half walk from our local hospital. I could see the hospital from the house I grew up in versus being out here on the farm. And I was so cognizant of how long it took me to drive to the emergency room. And that was enough to put the fear in me to know that, it would take this long for an ambulance to come the other way. And where I live and how our addresses are listed, I would have no idea of how to tell a 911 operator where I was. So something that I made my husband do afterwards was to sit down and draw a map and put the coordinates of each field or each farm down. And we have that copy and pasted absolutely everywhere we have an emergency kit.
Yes, I was literally just about to say that actually. I was like, when you bring up the ambulance, one of the other things that I recommend is exactly that, having like a list of your fields. So like here we have addresses for all of our fields, which I have since learned is like not the norm, especially like out west. But having your coordinates or having like the closest address to it and then knowing like how to talk your way to that field. Yeah, because like you said, like the 911 dispatcher is not going to know when I say like, oh, that's the whatever field. They have zero idea what I'm talking about. The other thing with that is like phone numbers too. So like one of the other things that I recommend is making a list of like important phone numbers, like even as simple as like in the event of emergency, call 911 and then, like call my husband and have his phone number there or whatever, because it is like has been proven in several studies that when an emergency happens, like you don't process and your brain shuts down. So your brain does not process the way that you think it would, like at a normal functioning level. And so anything that you can do to help prepare yourself so that you don't have to think in the event of emergency can really be beneficial.
And, you are the perfect example, Katie, of seeing what can happen so quickly and how quickly, a simple accident can turn into an emergency. So being as prepared as possible, I think we all want to do that. And just giving those simple tips of those extra things that we can add into a typical first aid kit, I think, can literally save somebody's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what you had mentioned before, like your brain literally shuts down, like fight, flight, or freeze. And I think it's so easy to think that that would never happen to me. I would know what to do. But like you said, your brain psychologically, whatever's firing in there just shuts down. And it's like, what the heck am I supposed to do? And I think the piece that you had mentioned about being a tool, as simple as a whistle, and to let everyone know if you are outside working or if you are standing there and you're like, what is that noise? It sounds like a whistle, knowing that that's going to be that connection to help and go find somebody, because unfortunately, rural internet and cell phone service is not where it should be in the age of 2025.
Yeah, even just like, I cannot tell you, and this is not just farming related, but in general, I cannot tell you how many people come to our emergency room that are like, have been down for like an entire 24 hours. Or farming, I've seen a lot, but like not farming, I've seen even more, because they didn't tell anybody that they were going to do something, or, you know, like their wife like went to check on them because they didn't come in for dinner. But like the reality was their accident happened at 9 a.m. this morning and they've been on the ground for 6, 7, 8 hours. And so like, not to like be controlling over, you know, what my husband's doing. And I like, you know, don't super care what he's doing, but I do like, especially when we're chopping and working in fields or that kind of stuff, I do try to just be like, hey, what time do you think you'll be home at? And if he's not home by that point, like I just try to send him a text and be like, you guys still good? Or he'll try to just like shoot me an update just again. So I know that like if something is not, you know, if I hear from him, then like that's great. But if not, like maybe I'll just like drive by and make sure that they're okay.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, just having that plan and having the routines of even like when it is 90 degrees out, the water truck comes by with water for everyone, and just simple things like that, that are those extras and that are the nice to haves for the people that are in the field, but also like the reassurance that everyone is hydrated and you're keeping an eye on them. Because I myself, you know, if you get in the groove of doing something and you're like, I'm going to do this until I finish, and kind of neglecting yourself in that process can really do damage to your body.
Yeah. And even I tell people too, like, if you buy a tourniquet or you get a tourniquet, like you can practice and it's not going to A, hurt the tourniquet, or B, hurt the person that you're practicing on. Like, tourniquets are not comfortable. And so like, I do say that, like, if you ever actually needed to use a tourniquet, like in order for it to stop the blood flow completely, A, the limb is going to look dead, for lack of a better word, because it is. It's going to look gray and ashy because there's no blood flow, but like it is really painful. But if that's the difference between life or death, like obviously I would be like, I'm so sorry, like we've got to do it. But it doesn't hurt. It doesn't make the tourniquet any less effective to practice on it. So if you get a tourniquet, open it, practice on your husband's arm, practice on your friend's leg, you know, just knowing how to do it and like being comfortable with what that is. So that way, again, in the event of like you ever having to use it, you at least know like how it goes on and what it should look like when it's on. So you're not like fumbling through, like, you know, trying to open it as you're shaking, that kind of thing.
For sure. You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/the Rural Woman podcast. So we've really been focusing our conversation really on the older generation, or our generation of farmer, but you have a 2-year-old, and farm accidents for kids happen. And it's unfortunate when it happens. And I think, you know, sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about, but can we talk about farm safety when it comes to our littlest farmers and suggestions that you have to keep the kiddos safe?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I always tell people that this is very dependent to each family. So each family like has to come up with what works for their family. Obviously, I have suggestions, and a lot of those suggestions are based off my experience as an ER nurse and things that I've seen. But ultimately, like, my kid and your kid might handle situations differently, or might be like different listeners or whatever. And so, you know, I think having the conversation, but then also like understanding like you have to do what works best and what looks best for your family. For us, like we have a couple non-negotiables, and one of those is lawnmowers. And again, I have just seen like really, really bad outcomes happen from kids getting run over by lawnmowers, for lack of a better word. I've just seen really, really bad situations with young kids getting run over by a lawnmower or falling off of lawnmowers and getting run over multiple times. So not just once. And so I think that for us, that's non-negotiable. We don't even allow my son to play on lawnmowers because we don't want him to learn that that's something that he can play on and ride on. Same with open cab tractors. So like, again, for us, like that's a non-negotiable right now at Brian's age, who's my son. But again, I've seen that go wrong. I've seen kids fall off of tractors and get run over and not have good outcomes. And I think just like having those conversations of like, what are our rules look like? And then trying to make everybody else aware of what those rules are as well. And so like for us, that looks like, really having an open conversation with my in-laws of like, hey, right now, like these are our rules and we would appreciate, and they're great. They, also feel the same way, but like just having that conversation so that everybody's on the same board with kind of what those rules are. And I think one of the other things that's really challenging as a farm mom and parent is how do you like get your kid to understand that it's serious without like also traumatizing them, And so I haven't really gotten to that point yet because my child still is like very young and, but I think that it's important for them to understand the severity of some of these accidents, but also like, I don't want him to be traumatized and not want to like be involved in the farm and be involved in ag. But I do think like as a farm mom, at least from my personal opinion, is like when my child has to listen. And because things can change so fast that like when I say no, it has to be no. And so sometimes like I've talked to people at work that don't live on farms and just like different parenting styles. And I'm like, I have nothing against however you want to raise your child is totally your decision. And even that goes to farming and farm kids as well. But like, for me, like when I say no, my child has to listen because sometimes that ultimately can be the difference between life or death in some of these like accidents if something were to happen at the farm. And so again, just like trying to be like on the farm, like be really a little bit more strict with our like listening versus like at home and that kind of thing. And I think just like having that conversation early and starting to just like put whatever practices you decide your farm is going to go with for safety into place and just kind of try to keep them talking about them and keep practicing them. I know like some of the things that I have seen and talked about is like dressing your kids in like bright colors, especially like in harvest season, just so they're a little bit easier to like see, and even just like waiting until machines, cut off or like not approaching like moving tractors, moving trucks, moving combines, whatever that looks like. And like just trying to talk through like, again, just kind of trying to talk to them about like the accidents that can happen. One other accident that like I've seen, unfortunately, a couple different times with kids. And again, I don't really know maybe you would have some insight on this, but I don't really know what to do to prevent it, is like them getting kicked by animals. And I think, again, the only thing is just like being mindful of like, hey, where you are, like talking through like how close you should get to a horse or how close you should get to a cow, and kind of talking through some of that. But that's kind of one of the other ones that I've seen unfortunately a few times, and sometimes the kids are great and sometimes I've seen them have really poor outcomes related to those type of injuries.
Right. And I think what you had said about like explaining this to kids without essentially scaring them and scaring them off from farming in general, I think it's going to be delicate and it's going to be unique to every single person. And whether it's your plan is to put the fear of God into them, that this is going to happen to you if you don't listen to mom or dad, versus like just explaining to them, like, this is what could happen. And, we have to be calm around animals. We have to, make sure whoever's operating the equipment can see you. If you can see them, then they should be able to see you with eye contact and that kind of thing. So like you said, and it's going to be different for everyone. And, the thing that I chalk it up to is, however many years ago, the family went to town and the kids were riding in the back of the station wagon. Most families don't do that anymore because we've learned from our experiences that that might not be the safest thing. Whereas, you and I didn't grow up on a farm. So the chores that we had to do as kids is going to look a lot differently than the chores that your husband or my husband had to do. So really being able to talk to your partner and within your extended family, if it's a family farm, to make that an understanding that this is how we are choosing to expose our children to agriculture, and everybody to be on board, whether they agree with you or not. Right? It's just like, this is what we have to do to keep safe. And when they're older, they can do more. And all of those things, I think, is super important. And an accident is an accident. Like you said before, like that is what it is called. Things happen. We can't look to blame people at, these scary times. We can only look to do better moving forward.
And ultimately, too, like I do, just like on accidents, like if an accident happens to a kid, like you can still use all of the same equipment on children. So like the principles are still the same for farm accidents on kids as they are for adults. Now, is that going to be like significantly more challenging trying to put a tourniquet on a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old? Probably. But also, like in the event of, again, like something happening, they're probably not going to be moving if you need to put a tourniquet on them. But like those farm tips and tricks and things all work on kids just as well as they work on adults. So it's all like the same principles, all the same kind of anatomy in kids and adults, that it doesn't really matter. Once an accident happens, then it's like in go mode, and it doesn't matter like how old you are.
For sure. Katie, you have given us so much to think about and so much to talk about at the kitchen table. What's your hope for the future of farm safety?
I think my hope is just that people understand how fast it can happen and try to be a little bit prepared. I always say like my what if is like there's been a handful of times like I've left the trauma bay after somebody has not had a good outcome and wondering like, what if they had been prepared? What if they'd had a tourniquet on their farm? Would that farmer still be alive with us today? And my hope is that, as scary as it is and as like sad as it is and as hard as it is to have these conversations, is that somebody will be a little bit more prepared for the event of an emergency that happens at their farm. And, if this can help save one person's life, then it's, has been worth it all.
Right. Then we've done our job today.
Yeah.
Katie, my last question for you, and a question that I love asking every amazing woman I get to sit down with, is what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
I think it is just the lifestyle that I get to live in, the lifestyle that I get to raise my family in. Like the slow mornings of being able to go outside and have coffee and just see the trees and listen to the birds. Not doing that right now. It's a little too chilly, but like in the summer, like just having those slow mornings and being able to just like get outside and like enjoy the nature, enjoy the farm, and being able to raise my child and hopefully like more children at some point in this lifestyle has definitely been the most rewarding part.
Amazing. And the baby cows.
Yes, the baby cows are close second.
Anybody who gets to play with baby cows or see baby cows, it's a good day.
Yes. I know if you're ever stressed, a visit to the calf barn always makes things better.
Absolutely. For the folks listening, Katie, who would like to connect with you and find the resources you have available for them, where can they find you online?
I am pretty much mostly on Instagram. Like I mentioned earlier, my username is The Dairy Wife. So at The Dairy Wife. I can also be found on Facebook. And if you have any questions or are interested in having me speak about this topic to an event or to you or whatever, please feel free to send me a message and I would love to continue the conversation over there.
Amazing. Thank you, Katie, for sharing your story and all of the amazing resources with us today. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre, To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.